to watch a human be able to not only go back into their trauma, but to be able to recover from it. And when I did that and I saw that, I was like, something about it made me want to do this. So I ended up going and becoming, I went through a couple of certifications. I've done clinical work, and I became an actual certified trauma facilitator. So I have worked with businessmen. I have worked with first responders. I've worked with, young people who had either porn addictions or molested themselves. So the work itself has been really, it's been fascinating because each of the medicines targets such a different, completely different experience, which is good. And it really helps you as a facilitator kind of understand when you're giving someone that medicine, what's the response? What are we going to expect here?
Welcome to the podcast that guides men to demystify and develop their intuition. I'm your host, Doug Beitz. Let's dig into the science and expand your horizons. Today we're joined by Alan Wiederhold, and here's a very condensed bio. Recently, he created a dietary supplement for brain health and neuroplasticity. He's passionate about discussing the intersection of science and spirituality. Alan is a childhood trauma survivor. He's a certified facilitator in psychedelic-assisted therapies. He recently published a book that explores the transformative power of psychedelics in spiritual lives. There's much more to this man. Let's find out all about him. Alan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Doug. It's great to be here.
Yeah, cool. So we spoke a week or so ago and had a chat, which I was telling my oldest son about it, shortly after, and he goes, "Did you have the record button?" And I said, "No." And he goes, "Dad, I keep telling you, you've got to do this." And because there was some gold nuggets in there, we just could have hit record and just gone straight into it. It was pretty cool. One thing you said in there, and I said, "Stop, don't say anymore," and I had to write it down, was pretty much the most powerful person is the one with no secrets. And I just love that. And where did that come from?
So I agree. I mean, the conversation we had last week was so much fun, and I got off and I was like, wow, there was just so much there. It was really, really a lot of fun. So thank you for that. That actually came from one of my coaches. So I belong to a mastermind group, or I call Wake Up Warrior, and my coach mentor Garrett J had written a book for men, really talking about a lot of the problems that men have today with identifying who they are. There's almost this conflict of, you hear a lot about toxic masculinity, you hear a lot about alpha males, but really when it get down to all of it, it's really being able to be 100% open and honest, and the willingness to be vulnerable. So he always talked about that phrase, the most powerful person in the room is one with no secrets. I never really understood that until really last couple of years, when I came forward and kind of talked about my trauma, and you and I had kind of talked about my whole history and wrote about all of it in my book. But I basically have bared my soul. There are no secrets with me anymore at all. When you write a book and you tell the world that you were molested and that you've had this incredible transformative journey through psychedelics, there really is nowhere else to go from there. So it really is, and you really do become the most powerful person in the room.
Yeah, it hit me because my mom, as wonderful as she is, she's now 92 in a nursing home. And it doesn't matter if one of my siblings tell her what I'm about to say, because as physically healthy as she is, her mind is extremely forgetful. It's minutes at the moment. She would always say to us, if my siblings were listening, they would go, "Oh yeah, we were raised with, don't tell so-and-so." She'd tell you something and be like, "Don't tell your father. Don't tell your brother. Don't tell your sister. Don't tell your wife." It was just like everything's a secret. And it was like, what? Why can't I tell them? It was a tagline at the end of everything she told you. It was just like, yeah. And so I grew up with that. Don't tell, and then to hear you say the other day, the most powerful person is the one with no secrets. And I'm like, how much power my mother lost by just always keeping things secret, like, or
You know, I remember my mom and dad used to say the same thing, or something very similar. It was no one needs to know our business, or no one needs to know your business. And I think a lot of us, I think we're led to believe that we're supposed to keep it all in and bury it all down. And that's usually what happens is you have these imprints or this trauma and you just bury stuff down. And you keep it down and then you keep going down and then eventually, there's an author, Bessel van der Kolk, wrote a book called The Body Keeps Score. And in his book, if you're not 100% open and authentic, your body naturally goes to war against itself. It just does. So we call it disease, you call it whatever you want to call, but it's always that constant keeping it down is what causes so much stress and anxiety for everybody.
yeah. When you were saying that, we're covering everything. I was picturing, like, you can see in the background here, that's my backyard. Like, I've got compost bins and all sorts of stuff, like fruit trees and things. Of like, we think like if we put stuff on top of it, it'll compost down, it'll break down, it'll become healthy and nutrient rich. It's
Yeah.
not. It's actually strengthening, and it's getting more resilient, and it's holding its full shape and purpose and strengthening down there. And then when you try and plant something on top of it, it's this rigid, hard thing, and it's nothing's going to grow in that soil, and it's ugly, and you got to dig it up one day. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
yeah, very powerful to
Yeah. I
get
mean,
those things
yeah,
out.
for me, I mean, my journey, we kind of talked about it, and again, really, I wrote everything in my book. I built a very large, successful company and had everything. I mean, if you looked at me, you would have no idea that everything had just been really buried deep. I mean, really deep. And when you have all that, but nothing seems to work, um, what do you do? But again, because you're told to keep it all down, and I remember feeling like I never had anyone to talk to. I could certainly never tell. I mean, as a man, you never really tell your wife or your best friend what's actually going on. And I
Well,
remember laying
we're
in
their
bed.
protector and provider. So if we tell them, we're going to
Exactly.
harm them.
Yeah, be the man. So we're always told be the man. And boys don't do that. Don't cry. Don't show your feelings. I mean, yeah, I mean, from the very beginning, we're taught that. So that's a pretty heavy line for a man to have to carry. So, again, for me, having this trauma happen early in my life, I buried all of that. I never really told anyone. It happened for a couple of years. And then when you arrive, so I met my wife in college and things were incredible. We were building everything. We had everything, but together we weren't talking. We were very miserable. I was very miserable, as she likes to remind me. And there were nights I would lay in bed and I would talk about, yeah, I would think about killing myself. Like I was just like the world would be better, and like I just couldn't seem to grasp like happiness. Like I never really, it was just something that I never identified with. I was always doing more or working more or having more, but again, just kind of filling voids. And then in the darkest hours, I turned to psychedelic medicine. So
Yeah, yeah. As we get older, I often reflect back to my childhood, to when I was pre 15, 16 years old, how simple life was. Like, it was rare to plan anything. You just, I mean, you planned that you were going to school. You knew Monday to
yeah,
Friday, it was you got up at certain time, or mum woke me up to, get on my bike to ride to school, and you did that. But what happened after school every day with your friends or on the weekends was, I mean, occasionally there'd be a birthday party or something. But then as life went on, and we got, I love the institution of marriage, but as we got married and had children, there's just the complexity just ramped up tenfold, 100-fold. Now it's like it's ramped up 17 million fold. Like, it's just,
right.
there's so many things to take your thought process to, like, oh, I haven't got that sorted out. I'm such a loser. I'm like, look on this social media. These coaches have got all that stuff sorted out, and they're doing this and they're doing that. Oh, like I'm just nowhere near it. And I think the simplicity. I was laying in bed an hour ago doing a guided meditation, and suddenly there was a part there where the lady was talking through, took you into your third eye, opening your intuition, and bang, it was a scene back to the house we lived in when I was 0 to 7. We had
Wow.
our back fences were like 3 foot high and they were chain wire. So there was, you could see into everyone's backyard. And all of a sudden, the little girl, she was a year younger than me. She lived sort of around the corner, but we could see each other's backyards. And she would stand up on their brick barbecue and yell my name out. And I would go around and walk around 4 or 5 houses up, go in because she wanted to play. And we would go and play. And life was just so simple. There was nothing to cloud your thoughts or, and as you say, we get together in our lives and now we're the protector, the provider. And it's, yeah, we just have thoughts of inadequacy
Yeah.
and that sort of thing.
Well,
It's,
I think, what's interesting too, when you talk about that time frame, 0 to 7, you have no concept of time,
mm,
which if you really think about it, time doesn't exist in the way that we think it does. We like to put everything into a box. So when I same thing, I go into a guided meditation, and I love that we have this conversation because when I talk to people about meditation, they're just kind of like, I don't get it. Like I could never sit. And uh, I was meditating a couple weeks ago, sitting out on my back deck, and I got a whole 5 year projection of the vision for my company. So like I literally like I I'm getting it all in as a download. I take my kids to the pool and I'm like literally just hammering out my whole 5 year that I got out of my meditation. But again, you have to be willing to look at time in a different way. So you have to be able to know that time doesn't exist like we think it does. The things that we see in a three-dimensional image really are only a reference back to our brain that references something else. Like it's not what we see is not really what it is. It's just an interpretation of something else. But when you start to understand that and you start to look at time differently, it kind of makes you rethink how everything else works.
yeah, yeah. Time is a very unusual, like, remember at that age, like Christmas, once Christmas had gone, we're into January. It was like, because I lived for Christmas, it was like, because my birthday's just before Christmas. So that was the only two, it was like Christmas time, I got presents. Um, it was just forever. Like it was like a lifetime. It was forever. And then now it's like, oh, it's Christmas again. Like, what were we in June? Like, I swear if I go to the shops next week, there'll be Christmas stuff there. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Which is
Anyway,
which is really, I mean, it's an excellent illustration of, if you ever sat somewhere and oh my God, time is just dragging on, like it's just taking forever. Or you've been in a situation where you were having so much fun, the time just like completely flew by. Uh, it doesn't. We just interpret it that way.
yeah,
So time is the exact same. It ebbs and flows. It's just the interpretation of how we have of it.
yeah, yeah. Um, I'm quick too, like something I didn't cover in the intro there, the your bio was your podcast. I've been
Yeah.
listening to some of those episodes recently, and one that I listened to, that I had a few tears in was, I don't know how many months or longer than that ago, you interviewed your oldest son.
Yes. I think that if any parent wants to know really about themselves, interview your son or your daughter. It was a very painful conversation that I'm glad things ended on. I mean, our journey today is so much different than where we were for like the first 31 years.
Yeah. And so he's only 33 now. So the last
Correct.
2 years you've had,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, you could tell like it
Yeah.
was a good relationship now.
It's
So,
such a great relate, and but again, I think it goes back to intentionality. I have my son, which, for the listeners, a little backstory. I was in the U.S. Navy for 12 years, and I went to boot camp. I got out, ended up having a child while I came home from boot camp, and friends with his mom, wasn't like that big of a deal. And then I went back to my ship, and Persian Gulf War happened, and he was born right around Christmas time a year later. And I came home to say goodbye because I had just started an enlistment and we were giving him up for adoption. I came home, I held him in my arms and I cried, and I wrote him a letter and I said, I hope someday you'll forgive me. That I was serving my country at the time and I just wasn't in a position. She didn't want to keep him. So I go back to my ship, and I'm just like, I'm emotionally relieved that he is going to find a home in a good place. That we had actually had a family picked out, but at the same time, I had this like this guilt and this sadness and this because he's and I found out that she couldn't do it. So about 6 weeks after, I get a letter that she kept him, and I immediately started writing, getting involved, sending pictures, and then I got out of the Navy off active duty after 3.5 years, just so I could have a relationship with him. And that's what things just kind of turned south for her and I. I mean, she was hoping that I would marry her, and I didn't. I kind of moved on with my life, and she was very vengeful. And by the time he turned 5, she had said that she couldn't really care for him anymore. That she wanted him to have a better life. I'd graduated from college. I'd begun my career, and I had married my college sweetheart, and things were great. So he had a lot of issues. He had a lot of trauma, a lot of things that had happened to him in those first 5 years that we really, we weren't equipped with. I still hadn't really talked about my own trauma with anybody, let alone my wife, who was my college sweetheart. And I worked. I worked all the time. I was always gone. The deal was always more important. I left my wife to raise my son while I went out, conquered the world, and I told myself, that I was doing it for them, and I was having and giving and being and doing all this really great stuff at their expense. I spent a lot of time on the road, like building a company, and then I was living at the time we were living in Michigan, and then we had the opportunity to run the whole East Coast of the United States. So my wife and I had built our dream home, and without even asking, my wife and I just decided we were going to do it. And we never asked our son, who at the time was 12. He was leaving all of his friends and everybody and everything he knew. My family was all there. My wife's family was there. And we left. We left everyone. And then we came to Baltimore, and I continued to work all the time. And Baltimore City won. My son got into the wrong crowd. And when I mean the wrong crowd, I mean gangs and drugs, and he was just constantly looking for attention. And I remember him reaching and crying out for help, and just saying, Dad, I'm having all these problems. He would call. I think he called me one day. I can't remember where I was, and he said, I'm just going to jump off the roof deck of the house. And I'm like, please don't do it there. Don't. I never said please don't. I said please don't do it there. I don't want to be known as the house where the kid jumped off the roof and killed himself. That was my response. I mean, when you look back at it now, it's like, oh my, like who was I? And we just grew further apart. And what he had learned to do was just to take and tell me exactly what I wanted to hear. And I enabled him by that. So, I bought him a car. What do you do when you don't have a job? You can't finish school and you're addicted to drugs, you buy a car. So he ended up living in the car for a year. I would call him because I kept his cell phone on, and I was trying to find out where he was. Was he okay? I used to look out the window every day, and like, am I going to get the call today that he's dead? And I didn't know how to reach him. I didn't know how to tell him how much I really loved him because I didn't really know love myself. Like I just wasn't in love with myself. My wife, same thing. I mean, he stole so much stuff from us as an addict, and we just kept justifying. And then he hit rock bottom and ended up going to jail. And then we didn't know what to do. So when he was in jail, we were relieved. We were relieved because we knew he was going to be safe. We knew that he couldn't do drugs. We knew that, all of this other stuff was hopefully going to be a rear view mirror for us. But he got out, and we didn't want him coming home because there was just so much damage that had been done that we just didn't like. I ended up putting him in Youth with a Mission. I sent him to Teen Challenge. I sent him to Bible college, anywhere but home. Like we had just started having a family. It was something we really wanted to do when he was younger. We just didn't know how he would respond to it. So we have a little girl, and then we have another little boy, and now he has no idea where he fits into this. And then we started like bringing him in home more, and we had a couple of visits, and it was nice, but I still wasn't like, I didn't know where he was. Like, I didn't know whether he had truly been free. So, we would have these conversations. I'd be traveling, and we were in Las Vegas, Nevada 2 years ago. I invited him to this event, and the event was called Free Man. It was a conference of entrepreneur businessmen. I had paid his $10,000 ticket for him to come and see all this amazing stuff that I had been part of. By this point, I'm growing. I'm still searching for who I am, but I'm now on a path. And then he and I had a war on the third day of the conference. He he had wanted me to come outside and talk to him. And, I'd been in this group for a while and I knew everyone, and I was, kind of the big deal and talking to everybody. And somebody came over and said, your son needs to talk to you. And I said, okay, can you wait until this breakout's over? And they're like, no, he really needs to talk to you now. And I'm like, and in my mind, I'm like, oh God, here we go. Drama again. And I went outside and he screamed everything he ever wanted to scream at me. For 31 years, he let it all go. And all I could do was take a knee because I deserved every bit of it. But then I stood up and I gave it right back. And I said, you don't think I knew what you were doing that whole time. And I have loved you since the day that I said goodbye. And we cried together. We prayed together at that moment. And we have had an incredible relationship ever since. But to have that conversation on that podcast and to be able to kind of come full circle, to be able to talk about it, it was absolutely incredible.
Mm. So no secrets. You
No secrets.
you both yelled it out,
Yeah.
got it out. Unfortunately, I mean, not unfortunately, fortunately, you were able to yell it out, which had more
Yeah.
effect and force, I guess. But had it
Yeah.
been spoken a lot more often, a lot more regularity, probably the intensity of the tone mightn't have been needed each
Yeah.
time. Yeah.
I used to tell him, because my dad used to say it to me, when you leave this house, you represent me. I I had no idea who I was. He had no idea who I was. I never told him. I didn't even know. So that was always the thing that for him, he's like, you used to tell me that it represented me, but you never told me who you were. You never showed me who you were. Like I saw the business side of you. I saw the dad who was on the phone and all of the other stuff, but I never saw you. I never saw your heart. Like I never knew what you were about. And now, so much more about intentionality with my kids. This weekend was Father's Day, and just to be able to see where I am now. I don't do meetings before 10 o'clock anymore. I love mornings with my kids. I don't do a meeting after 4 o'clock. I get whatever I need to get done between 10 and 4 in my business, and then I'm home and my phone goes away and I focus on my kids. But I'm now at a point now where like, my son and I, he'll call, he's in Michigan and I'm in Maryland, and he'll call and we'll just talk for an hour just about random stuff, or he's growing a new business himself and he has some, he needs advice, or he'll call and he's upset about something and he just needs somebody to pray with. Um, and I see it with my other two. I'm so much more again intentional with what I do because I have this opportunity. And when you ask them, what am I? And I think if you were to ask a lot of parents, people would say, and I had a friend tell me that when he asked his daughter, what his favorite thing to do was, they would say work. That's a gut punch for a lot of people because they see everything. Our kids see everything that we do.
Yeah.
So I pray with my kids at night before bed. You and I talked in our 1 hour last week about the challenge. So now my daughter and I started a challenge in February that our pastor of our church throughout, what's the very first thing that you do in the morning? So the very first thing you do in the morning is what you're a disciple of. So the very first thing I do in the morning before bathroom or anything else is I get on my knees. And I just thank God for life. I thank God for the opportunity of whatever's going to come, good, bad, and different. It doesn't really matter. And I thank God for my wife before my kids. And this is where you and I talked about this before. I think this is where a lot of us we get really misguided. We put our kids in front of everything. Those kids are going to be gone one day. And one day it's just going to be you and your spouse. What are you doing today to be able to nurture that thing 20 years down the road? And that's what I found was happening with me, with my wife, is I spent all this time working. I spent all this time on the road. I never gave her any ounce of respect. I never invested in her. And now she's my ride or die. She's my number two behind me. And then my kids will always say, why mom? Like, because you're leaving someday. Like, you came into our lives. We didn't come into yours. But being able to have that intentionality and be that example for your kids is a really cool do-over for me.
Yeah. Yeah. We do. I find I learn a lot from my kids because I've got 4 adult sons, and I just something I hadn't thought about for ages. When you were saying that, and I just jotted down. We used to live on a little tropical island about 350 miles north of the equator in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. We had a little scuba dive business, and we were out one day. There was my oldest son, his now wife, girlfriend then, on the boat, and I'm trying to think. Might have just been the three of us out, or we might have been out fishing or something, no fish or whatever. And we came across a pod of dolphins, which was not uncommon. And usually there might be half a dozen to 2 dozen dolphins, whatever. And we got used to them. We'd go along, and they'd ride the bow wave of the boat, and it was cool, and we liked it. This particular day, we started seeing dolphins everywhere. Like, there would be 50 surfacing at a time, and it was insane. Like, and they would be everywhere. Like, you would estimate there were at least 1,000 dolphins, because there would be 50 come out of the water at a time,
Wow.
and then another 50, and they were like as far as you could see in every direction, and the ocean was like glass. They were just like, oh my God. And anyway, so I've got my camera out, and I was always have my camera, and I'm just like shooting photos like you wouldn't believe. I'm going crazy, and and the other dolphins would ride the bow of the boat. These dolphins wouldn't. It was weird. Like, it was like, what's going on? So we had to keep steering towards them, and then they would go away from us. And I'm frustrated, and I'm hitting the camera, and then eventually my memory card fills, because I've taken like 1,000 frames or something, like, because I've got it on, just you hold the button down, it just keeps
Right.
firing 3 frames a second. And I got some incredible photos, believe me. And then I'm saying to my son, oh, my memory card's run out. And he goes, Dad, let's just enjoy this. This isn't ever going to happen again. Like, we know, like we've been there for years. We've never heard anyone say this, like that they'd seen anything like this before. Like, let's just enjoy it. And I'm like, but my memory card ran out. Like, he had, and he had
So
underwater
true.
video cameras and everything like that. He was into getting it, but it was just like, you're getting a message, Dad, that you've taken enough photos. All right, you're not going to get a better photo than what you've already got. Right, it's just the same scene repeating here, and we found out later through the photos. I published them out in a few spots, that these were a different variety of dolphins that were migratory, and they just by fluke were passing by this
Just
tiny
passing
little
through.
island and they're passing through. And tomorrow they're going to be there. They were off, and they were dolphins that are not social with humans, and they do not like people. And
Mm.
so he's just taught me, he's like, Dad, just pretend we don't have a camera. Like, pretend there's no such thing as a camera. It's 300 years ago. You're just going to enjoy the moment. And it's
So
like,
true.
yeah,
So that was the cool thing about the conference with my son. So I didn't realize the day that we had this whole thing, and the very last day of this conference, and I remember the conference is called Free Man. And it was actually the 7th year of my son being clean, of sober. no drugs, no alcohol, nothing. And he had said that to me. He's like, do you realize what today is? And I said, I'm like, why would I know? So he's like, it's my seventh year. We were just like, wow, like on his seventh year, we finally were able to turn a corner. Uh, yeah, it was crazy. But what it has taught me is how to even be a better son to my dad. So because we always think, and maybe you don't, maybe it's just because I'm on this new journey. I never really looked at life from my parents' perspective. Yeah, I was just talking to my dad on Sunday, and he he was apologizing. We had this really great conversation, and I was talking to him about like just like where are you at like today, and out of the blue, he was just like, I'm really sorry I was so hard on you. Growing up, you were the oldest. And you're like, where's all this coming from? And then I'm like, oh my God, he's reading my book. So yeah. I talked to my mom, and she's like, yeah. She's like, we are reading your book, and I love it. Like, we just love your book. So again, no secrets, but I never really asked my dad about his life. My dad left home at 17, so it couldn't have been that great. He left and went to Vietnam. I never asked. But we do. We have these images of our parents, of the people around us, and we tell ourselves a story about them, and we don't even think about it. Like we kind of go into it, and we just accept it as what it is. So I was on an airplane a couple weeks ago, and I was coming back from Chicago, and there was a guy sitting next to me, and he keeps looking at me, and I start talking to him, and I find out that he's a CFO of sort of a financial officer, does numbers and stuff. And we're talking about somehow we talked about my podcast, and he's like, I knew you," and I'm like, "Oh my God!" Like somebody's actually listened and seen me from my podcast. And he was telling me, he said, I had a story about you. When I got on the airplane, you're sitting in the second row. I'm in jeans and a nice jacket, and yeah, I'm going to a business meeting. And he's like, and I just told myself, there's a guy who doesn't want to talk to anybody. And it's just crazy how we all tell ourselves stories about each other without really getting into the facts of who they are and what they're about.
Mm, yeah, interesting, interesting.
Hmm.
Um, and so when you were talking about your book that your parents were reading, is
Yeah,
that's not your latest book?
yeah,
Oh, it
it
is.
is.
Okay. Right. Okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Because I'm almost halfway through it. So
yeah.
into the bit with just started the chapter on psychedelics and Christianity.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting. Cool, cool.
So
Um,
yeah, again, I told my parents probably it's been about 3 years now. Again, let's go back to the no secrets.
yeah.
I had really gone to war with myself. Like just I was at the bottom, and my wife was just like, I love you, but I'm not in love with you. You don't even love yourself. Um, I really want this to work. I have no intentions of going anywhere, but you need to find yourself. So I yeah, so you grasp at things. So we were doing this really cool couples journal, and 6 weeks in, it was the big question was, what's the biggest secret you've never told? Now, I encourage your listeners to go to your spouse and share what the biggest secret that they've ever had. And I blurted it out. I was sexually abused for 2 years. And she looks at me and she's like, I've never heard the story. And I'm like, and I just start crying. I'm like, I've never told anyone. So, and then told my parents, and then you get this guilt and all this other stuff that goes with it. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you. And but it's actually been super liberating. I've had so many people who have listened to my show, who have read my book, who have said it happened to me. Yesterday actually just happened as well. I'm somebody gave me a call on the way home, and I'm like, hey, like I'm reading your book, and I've never told anyone. Happened to me, and I'm just like like blown away. Like how many people are impacted, and just the ability to be free enough to tell somebody your story liberates and allows other people to tell theirs.
And gives you strength.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And like I was telling you last week, 6 months or so ago, I had a guy on, Phil McDonald. He's got some boxing world records. And during the podcast, he came out and he said that he was sexually abused when he was about 10.
Mm.
And like he told me, and I was, it touched me when he said that. But when we stopped recording, he said to me, Doug, I've never said that publicly before. And I went, oh shit. Like I was taken back then that all of it, like, because we didn't get into it. I wasn't questioning him. Like it just, I don't even know what we were
Yeah.
talking about. It just came out and he just said it. And I mean, it hadn't been played publicly yet because we just recorded it. I said, well, do you want to leave that bit in? He goes, oh, absolutely. He goes, you have no idea how good I feel now. And then he rang me up after that and he's like, mate, I feel so good. Like I feel so liberated. Like, let's just do this. And yeah, like yeah. He's like, yes. He just took him up. Well, I'll
Yeah.
say a notch. Maybe it took him up a couple of notches. I don't know. Like it definitely gave him more strength and power as a person. That yeah, it's out there. And
Yeah, so it's funny. I had a very similar situation happen. So I was talking to one of my guests, and we were talking. So the cost of doing nothing, I created it to talk about imposter syndrome. Really, I created it for other CEOs and entrepreneurs like myself that were struggling with identity. And I had a guy on. He was actually a friend that I went to a Navy SEAL boot camp with, and we were talking about a business that he'd started. Now, when I met him, he was actually kind of in the middle of starting this business. And, again, I've built a really successful large company and I'm asking questions, and he doesn't really have a great handle on this business. And we're all kind of like, are you sure this is what you want to do? And we were talking about it on the show, and I didn't know how bad it was. Like how bad, like everything that could go wrong with starting a business. The lease space was horrible. He overpaid for everything. I mean, it was just really bad. And then the projections were all wrong. And he was leaving for work one day, and he kissed his wife goodbye, and he said, "See you later." And he had every intentions of killing himself that day. And we're on the show and we're talking about this. His wife had never known or heard that story. So he stops and he's looking at me and he's like, and I hit pause. I'm like, do you want to continue this? Or we can edit all of this out. I've got a great engineering team. And he's like, no, let's go. So then he calls me on Sunday. My podcast released on Thursday. He calls me Sunday crying. He listened to the episode with his wife. No secrets. And he said that was the one thing that's liberated his marriage.
I'm silent, mate, because yeah, I'll start babbling.
We all want our stories out. We do. We just want someone to give us permission to do that.
We do, mate, and that's why for me it's about helping men to develop their intuition so that they can make one better decision a day. Because the ripple effect of every man on the planet making one better decision a day is phenomenal. That just think
So
of
you
how
just
on the lighter side, just think of how many cats will be kicked less, like,
yeah.
and how
But you
many,
said you said an interesting word, the word ripple.
yeah,
So I journal every day, and it's really how I start my day. And ripple is a word that came to me in my meditation. And so we kind of talked about my coach and kind of how I found plant medicine and all this other stuff. I got a call, or I got a voice text from my coach Saturday, and he was on vacation. It was his birthday. He's sitting in Cancun, and he's like, "Brother," he's like, "where you are today?" He's like, "I remember 2 years ago sitting on the deck of Dana Point, and you wrestling with yourself, like just wrestling. Like I was still in such a pit. Everybody around me had gone and had these incredible transformative journeys in psychedelics and plant medicine, and I was resistant. It was a drug. It was not Christian. I mean, you name it, I said it, but you could see this war within my soul. And when I went, And my wife and I went together and I healed, and we can talk about that or not. I don't really care. It was the ripple. It's just so interesting that because he obeyed and he said that to me, he created the ripple for me. But then I've had other people who, as we've said, guys talking to his wife about suicide, ripple. We've had people who've listened to my book who are now telling other people what happened to them, ripple. Now I've made this company, this new business venture is all about ripple. So it's all about making an impact on everyone's life. So it's going to be absolutely incredible.
Yeah, yeah, that's yeah, really powerful. And yeah, it's yeah. So let's talk about your psychedelic experience, because it seems that since you've had that, life has turned the corner a little, has become a little more
Yeah.
enjoyable. You're getting on better with your son. I mean, maybe you started getting better on with your son before you had the psychedelics. I'm not sure, but
Yeah.
you know, yeah, yeah.
You know,
So
it's kind of funny. I did. We had the fight, like the thing in October, and I remember telling him I was going to do this. So, you know, again, I'm searching. I'm still trying to figure out my spirituality. God had told me we were driving down the road, probably February of that year. So go to this church, and I drive by, I look at the church. I'm like, no, I'm not going there. So I get this again, intuition, God speaking to me saying, go. Second time, no, not doing it. Third time, my wife is going to Florida to run a half marathon. I've got the kids in the back seat. I drive by again and I hear it. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to go. And I say to my kids, we're going to go to church. They're like, where? Like, I mean, they're 5 and 7. Like, they had no idea what it was. So it was Friday. We go Sunday. I drop them off in the little kids program. It's a mega church. It's absolutely amazing. And the pastor says, welcome home. And I start crying. Like, I felt like I was home, but still questioning, still like not understanding. God still was not like experiential for me. I again grew up in a Christian home. I went to Bible college. Like you name it, I know it. But knew it. Um, had this thing with my son in October. I go to this Navy SEAL boot camp. I lay my sins at a cross and I put it all in a 50-pound pack and I carry it over a mountain and still nothing. So now March, we're getting ready to go on this psychedelic retreat. My wife and I are going together. Really, it was to save our marriage. Now we're building a dream home.
and
Like,
I'm just
yeah,
you saying your wife and you are going together. So it's your
yeah.
idea.
So
You talked her into going.
I did. So now I thought so if you were to ask her, it'd be kind of funny. She would say I didn't ask her and I said we were going. I thought this was a joint decision. Uh, we started researching it. We started watching
We or
documentaries.
you
But no,
started.
together we did. Like
Okay.
we would watch, like I'd read books. We watched. There's a documentary on Netflix called How to Change Your Mind. We watched it. We watched a couple of other ones together. And then we were on a joint call with this retreat, talking. And then there was an integration process where she had to talk to her person that was going to be leading her. And what are you trying to get out of this? And then I had a completely separate person, completely different intentions. And we were really afraid. So, you know, one of the things that we kind of made a commitment to is we date each other every Friday night. Like we go on a date. We have for a few years. We go away once a quarter. We go away for one whole week, no kids. So we really have made ourselves a priority. Now we're going on a date 2 weeks before we're scheduled to leave, and it's the worst date we've ever had. Like we're blaming each other about this place that we're going to. We're both afraid. Like we're completely freaked out about what we don't know. What is it going to be like? What's going to come out? We had heard stories of marriages just ending. Like they'd go into psychedelic medicine, and the person would come out and realize, I don't want to be with you anymore. Like I can do better. My soul is now better and my soul is better without you. So in the back of our minds, like there's this fear. Now, she's my college sweetheart. She's my soulmate. Like, and I've always believed that, but we let this fear kind of get inside of where we were. And And then you throw the God mix into this thing. And I'm like, well, if God wants us to, be divorced, it's just God's will. That is such a lie. Anyone who says that. So we're trying to justify all this. We get to this place where we're going. A car picks us up at the airport, and we're talking to the driver, and he's telling us how great his life is because he left his wife in November as a result of this therapy. Now, my wife and I are looking at each other, and now we're both like really afraid. So we um we just spend the day together, just kind of walking around this little compound, and just like it was cool. And then the next day you actually go into a 3-hour medicine journey. Now I'm in one room, my wife is in the other room, completely independent of each other. You have a blindfold, you have a mask, you speak your journey and they record it. But my wife was in my experience. That's how connected our souls were. So, I talk a lot about this in my book. So, when you go into medicine, they always say you either blast off or you fall. So, I fell like completely through a dark space and I landed on an Aztec temple. And my wife is standing next to me. And I'm looking over all this incredibly beautiful, lush green and this beautiful winding river, and then I'm taken off. Then I see this Aztec eagle and it's changing shapes. And then I'm sitting on the steps of my grandparents' home where my abuse happened. And I feel a tap on my shoulder and I scream. My body is like heaving. Please don't make me go. I relived it. Then again, I'm taken to another situation where I had some trauma. I saw a fight between my mom and dad. I was 4. I don't even remember this fight, but my subconscious surely did. But I was in the room. I could see the windows. It was like I was there. And then I relived a bunch of other imprints. And then it was almost as if I was watching a movie. I was sitting in a seat, I'm watching a movie, and then I could either choose to walk away or not. And in every one of them, I chose to face whatever came at me. And I'd made that decision. In the process of all that, I'm on a dirt road and I find my heart. Like I literally say, there's my heart. I haven't seen you in a very long time. And I bent down and I picked it up. And when I did, it blossomed. It was like this just incredible feeling. And then as I continue in this journey, I go back to the room where I was abused, but now he's on the edge of the bed and he's crying, and I'm the one in power. And he's apologizing to me and he's telling me that it was done to him. So in every one of the doors and the situations I had gone into, I got to confront every one of them. I got to confront my dad for crying when I was 4. It was something that I didn't need to see. It shook everything, and it actually created a foundation of what I thought success and money were about. They fought about money, and I was going to make sure it never happened to me subconsciously. Again, I'm 4. Like, it's just so fascinating how the subconscious works. My wife is so focused on my healing and my journey that she kept praying and she kept saying my name, and I would hear it in my experience. And I would say things like, when you breathe, I can move mountains. Like when you talk, I can do anything. And then there was a point where I had actually asked her to leave because I was so focused on healing myself, and she was so focused on me that I had to ask her to leave my experience. And then there was like the craziest thing started happening. Like I had this out of body, and I'm looking down at myself in the bed, and my wife is covering my hands and my feet, and God is standing above me with a light, and I'm able to see this light. And there's all this darkness that had been hitting me: depression, anxiety, trauma, abuse. My wife took all of it for 25 years. She took all of my darkness, and she protected me from me, but at her expense. So I got to see this, and then I got to
So
see the
what
ability to
what you're
go.
seeing there is the previous 25 years of
Yeah,
her
25 that we
protecting
were
and
together, we
caring
were
for
married.
you.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
Ah.
25 years of being together. She took everything, like all my pain, all my laying in bed wanting to kill myself. Never told her, but she took all of it. Yeah. So
Energetically, unconsciously,
yeah,
she's
energetically, she
taken
took
it,
everything.
that energy from you onto her.
Yeah. Yeah,
Wow.
I basically stole her identity. I because she was like, I was just, again, when you don't love yourself and you're not open and vulnerable about what it is that you want or connect, you have two very isolated, lonely people. But when you have one who has a lot of trauma and the other one who has their own imprints and their own trauma, I mean, she took all of mine. So we're going through this amazing thing, and at the very end of my experience, um, they come to you and they say, the other partner wants to come together. Is that what you want? Now, remember, people have said no. Like, I don't want to be with that person. You have to acknowledge in the beginning that that could happen. You know, I could have said no to Rachel. Like, we're done. Like, I'm healing and see you later. I was so excited to see her because I just knew that she was my soulmate. Just hearing her and being able to come together. And at the very end, before I actually go into the room with her, I'm walking down a road, and Rachel and I are standing, walking in this garden with God, and we're both naked and unafraid, like Adam and Eve in the beginning, which is how I got the name for the book, Walking in the Garden. But that was how my journey actually ended. And then they bring us together. And then Rachel and I spent like the entire next day just like replanning and reconnecting our lives. I mean, it was just like, that was 2 years ago in March. Um, since then, I have gone on a lot of other psychedelic journeys. I've seen a lot of really interesting things. Again, my second experience. Oh, before that. So I come home 6 weeks later, driving down the road, and I get this internal conversation. You know what you need to do. And I was driving, I'm literally in the car and I'm like looking around and I'm like, I'm not doing that. And God is again saying, you know what you need to do. And I'm like, I'm not doing it. I'm like, I don't even know where to find him. And God's like, really? You don't know how to find your abuser. And I'm like, okay, I do. Facebook. I'm sure I can find him. I called him and I forgave him after 48 years. So
How,
driving down the road,
how
pick
was
up the
he on
phone.
the other end of the phone?
He obviously hadn't talked in 48 years. I said, I don't know where you are in your life. I don't know where you are at all. I don't know if you're married. I don't know if you have kids. I don't know anything. I just wanted you to know that I'm going to be okay. And what you did to me no longer holds me. And I just wanted you to know that. And he deflected and he said it happened to him and he was very sorry that it did happen. And I told him I knew. I had seen it in my own spiritual experience, and I got off the phone. And I'm driving down the road. I'm like, I can pretty much do anything after
Yeah.
after that. So,
It's a
yeah,
really hard thing that the more hard things you do, like the
mm,
easier everything else becomes. Yeah. Reverse
yeah.
parking becomes pretty easy after you do stuff shit like that.
But the problem with that, I think, for a lot of people too, though, is that when you go to war for so long and then you're living in peace, what do you do with that? Like, because it almost becomes overwhelming that you're not fighting. So, for a month, I came home and I'm like, God, I feel like all this peace after I called him 6 weeks later. So, now I'm like 3 months in and I'm like, God, like I'm not at war and I don't like it. Like, it's just like it's a weird feeling. So I say, well, I'm going to go in, I'm going to have another psychedelic experience, try to work through that. So I'm standing on the same dirt road that I saw my heart. And this time I'm looking back and there's these bags of all of my stuff, my trauma, everything that I had left. They were in suitcases. And I'm looking at them and I kept looking back. And the voice kept telling me, why are you looking back? You left those there 3 months ago. And I wrestled with that. And it was almost as if my soul was saying, okay, do you need a funeral for that? Let's have a funeral. And the next thing I know, I'm literally having a funeral. Like I'm in a casket and my family's all super happy and everyone's laughing. And I'm like, wait a minute, like this is insane. I get lowered into the ground and lit on fire. And then I hear, okay, let the dead bury their dead, time to move forward. So, and that's all I've done. So just move forward.
Yeah. Wow. And
Craziness, right?
yeah. And just out of curiosity, reading in your book, you list all the different type of psychedelics there
Psychedelics.
are.
Mhm.
So when you've had these couple of experience, have they been different types or is there a
Yeah.
particular type? Yeah.
Yeah, so one of the things I think that's made me um, successful is I have a natural curiosity for things, and then it's almost like a dog with a bone. Like I have to learn everything there is to know about what it is. Now, again, talking about my wife and her experience, she didn't get the experience that she really wanted or needed. She was so focused on mine. So I started researching everything there was to know about psychedelics, and I was going to give her the same experience. So found it. We checked into a hotel room, and I watched her for 8 hours, just go to war with her soul, and it was the coolest thing, to be able to watch a human be able to not only go back into their trauma, but to be able to recover from it. And when I did that and I saw that, I was like, something about it made me want to do this. So I ended up going and becoming, I went through a couple of certifications. I've done clinical work, and I became an actual certified trauma facilitator. So I have worked with businessmen. I have worked with first responders. I've worked with, young people who had either porn addictions or molested themselves. So the work itself has been really, it's been fascinating because each of the medicines targets such a different, completely different experience, which is good. And it really helps you as a facilitator kind of understand when you're giving someone that medicine, what's the response? What are we going to expect here?
Yeah, that's cool. And when you talk about first responders, I hadn't thought of that because I was a professional firefighter for about 16 years. And
Seen some
yeah,
stuff? Yeah.
yeah. And I remember for a year or two there, I was a work health and safety coordinator, and I got roped in with ambulance once. They needed a
Mm.
impartial third party to come in and do an investigation between, yeah, and it was, so we had to separately interview two paramedic officers, and one was a Vietnam vet, and one was sort of like early 20s and young guy, and they were clashing heavily. And the Vietnam vet just wouldn't open up. He was just like, yeah, whatever, just like, if you're gonna sack me, just sack me, like whatever. He was
Right.
obviously very traumatized and things. And yeah, there's a lot there where they could be helped.
There's a lot of work right now. So, what's so interesting when you kind of watch how things are coming full circle. There was so much work done in psychedelic research back in the 60s. A lot of people don't realize, I think it was 1959, the cover of Time magazine was a magic mushroom because they had seen that it was all of these healing effects, that it really could target trauma. But then when we had the counterculture wars here in the US, there was again all this incredible research being done by Johns Hopkins Psychedelic Research and guys like Timothy Leary at Harvard, and there were just incredible amounts of data that supported the ability to heal people. But when you have a counterculture war and you have hippies and you have, the African American community who are starting to rise up and now they're using heroin, that was one of the things that President Nixon, our president in the 60s said, if you want to control a population, you take away their ability to search. So he reclassified psychedelics as a Schedule 1 and basically made it illegal. And now here we are, 50 some years later, and now there's 130 different clinical trials going on right now for everything from anxiety, depression, postpartum, for psychedelic therapy. We're re-looking at all of this now. So you kind of ask, like 55 years that we have lost of potential therapy, and now all we do is just throw a drug at it. We give you a drug that will increase your serotonin and SSRIs, and they take away your personality, but you minimize the amount of anxiety and other things. So it's such a really cool time to be able to kind of see where things are headed, and that people are now being open and willing to talk about trauma, and they're at least willing to be able to look at psychedelic therapy.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's powerful. And the world has, like we were talking about time before, like like when we were kids, it seemed like, for me when I was 5, it seemed a whole lifetime until Christmas would come again. But the world is changing incredibly fast, because you imagine, just go back 20 years. Imagine you and I having this conversation, and just like, let's go to technology 20 years ago.
Mm.
We'd be on a telephone, but
Yeah.
also, how would we have found each other? And you imagine your mindset and my mindset 20 years ago having a conversation around this stuff. Like it would have been nothing that anyone would have been that interested in listening to. You know,
Right.
it's like we've evolved, technology's evolved, the things, and we've just expanding and opening, and I find that very exciting. And then you've now, was it during a guided meditation or during a meditation where you got the idea for these new supplement for the brain
I
and
did
that?
actually.
Yeah.
So most of my ideas, it's so my team. Sometimes I think my team thinks I'm crazy, but yeah. So I was actually in a meditation. I was trying to figure out what to do. I have been leading, facilitating other people, and I thought that's what I was going to do. And in the meditation, I saw this hydration supplement that I created because one of the things that I found with a lot of people that I would facilitate is that depending on the medicine, there is a huge serotonin dopamine increase, and then it's like you crash. So I always kind of equate it to like a hangover. So anybody who's ever drank a lot or has been on an all-night bender or done a lot of drugs, next day you don't feel so good. So especially when you're old like us, like it could last for days. But I was seeing that for a lot of the people that I was working with. I saw it for myself when I had my own experiences. So in this meditation, I see something in my pantry of my house. I'm like, okay. So I started doing all this research. Now I have been working on a genetic test with a lab down in Washington, D.C., where we have been able to identify certain genetics based on psychedelic therapy and what you can use. So we started down that path. I mean, that's really, we were looking for to apply for a grant, worked backwards on the research and came up with a supplement. So we are now actually going into production next week. And this all literally just happened like 4 months ago. So
So it's a hangover supplement for taking psychedelics. I mean, being a very crude way to
yeah,
describe it.
yeah,
Right. Interesting. And so when you say like as we get older, we get more hangovers, is that literal? Or like do younger people have as much of a hangover effect as
they
well?
do. So different psychedelic therapies like ketamine, for example. So ketamine is an off-label use anesthesia that's been around since the 60s and 70s. It wasn't designed as a psychedelic, but they found in 2000s that it had incredible amount of application for depression and anxiety and other things. So ketamine is right now it's legal because it's an off-patent usage drug, but the effects really you have this crazy hangover that you just like you want to put ice on your head, and I mean it really is brutal. And I've heard it from young people, talked to a lot of different clinics as we were creating it. Again, the other drugs are not always legal. Most of them are not. So when I talk about these in my book, depending on where you are, like MDMA is the one that everyone's really watching right now, ecstasy or what people call Molly. There's been
Is
a
ecstasy the same thing as MDMA?
yes,
Okay,
yeah,
right. Yeah. You can,
yeah,
so
or people call it
my
Molly.
ignorance. Oh yeah.
No, no, and it's definitely
Yeah.
not ignorance. So this is not this is not a realm people talk about.
Yeah,
So
one dealer sells me one thing, and the other they have different terminology. Well, no, I'm just
yeah.
yeah, kidding.
So,
Yeah.
but we've been watching these clinical studies since 2017 that ecstasy, MDMA has had incredible progress for PTSD. Like 71% of people in the trials haven't had no more PTSD symptoms after the first time taking it with talk therapy. I mean, that's incredible.
Mhm.
So if you have 71% of these people no longer have traumatic symptoms, at least 6 months, that's crazy. But it's still illegal. So right now the FDA in the US is evaluating it. I know that Australia is reviewing it. I know Canada is also looking at it and reclassifying it as something different. But same thing with a lot of these. So psilocybin, magic mushrooms, each country, each different state in the US, they all have different rules and regulations. Some are what they call decriminalized, where they're just not going to show up at your house. It's no one is out robbing banks or stealing from a psychedelic therapy. It's not like, a fentanyl or heroin where you've got to have it. I mean, it's more of a psychological, neurological thing than it is, you know, heroin or fentanyl. So it will be interesting to see over the next 5 years, which ones do become legal, and which ones don't, and how they're applied. We're starting to see churches like pop up all over the world too that are, ayahuasca. Ayahuasca is a root that's typically grown in South America, but we're seeing churches pop up everywhere where they're ayahuasca churches because it's more ceremonial. But yeah, so it's kind of an interesting time right now.
Yeah. And my hiccup and hang up with the whole thing is knowing, like, if I suddenly decided I wanted to have some LSD or MDA, like, where do you buy it? And how
Yeah,
do you know what you're buying? And how do you
and
know
and that's
who
where,
made
yeah.
it? Is
And that's
this really
where
battery acid or is this the real thing?
100%, because you're starting to see that in a lot of other things too. What am I really getting? And it really, to some degree, the same with supplements. Yeah, I've kind of been learning as I've been creating this dietary powder that, it has to be tested, but it has to be tested in a lab, and I have to be able to prove that the ingredients that are on the label are actually what are in there. So I've had to have independent testing done. So it's the same thing. So I think right now, again, because we are in an early time for psychedelics. Right now, it's mostly clinical. So there's a lot of research going on right now. So a lot of clinical studies that are happening. But you really have to check the sources of where you're getting your stuff, and where are they getting them? Are they testing them? So there's a lot of things, but I'm not advocating that people go out and do anything that's illegal. But there are a lot of different avenues to be able to acquire this stuff.
Yeah. 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 Like, I'm probably 2018, something like that. I was in Seattle and I settled, flew in, settled into my Airbnb sort of just after dark and crashed out with the time zones and woke up sort of 18 hours later and sort of bleary eyed. I start walking down the street looking for something to eat. And I look across the road and here's this like weed shop. And I'm like, am I hallucinating? Like this, like, because in Australia, you just like would lock you up like big time
Yeah.
instantly. And I'm like, I sort of wander across the street and I wander in. The guy's like, "Oh, hi, can you help?" I said, "Mate, I'm not buying anything." I said, I'm from Australia. I just can't believe this." And he's like, "Oh, I've been to Australia. It's great." And he starts talking away. And I'm just like, but I started talking to him because there was no one else in the shop. I wasn't, taking business away from him. And I found out everything had dosages, so
Mm,
you sort of like it was all legit. And
yeah.
there was this, this strength, this strength, this strength. And you sort of like, oh, okay. Just like a bottle of alcohol, it says 4.5% on your beer or
Yeah.
7.9% on a glass of wine. You're like, oh, I actually would know how much to take. Like I could work it out, the effect after a little bit of trial error in the beginning. But so like these other things, it's yeah, if you knew there was a proper source,
Yeah.
and like I told you, I got I went right to the root of the thing when I was 14 with mushrooms. And I knew where my mushrooms came from. I
Yep.
picked them out of the cow poo in the paddock. And the first week I opened it up and the stem went a little bit purpley and I did my thing with some boiling water and mashed it up and drank it down. And I noticed zero effect. So the following week, I went and to the same paddock and picked another one. So I knew where it came from. So I'm thinking I've got the real thing here, but I couldn't tell the strength of the dosage because when I opened that stem up, it went very quickly deep, 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 dark purple, which almost looked black. And I thought, oh, this one's probably better. And I mashed it up and it went off the scale. Like I went out of the universe. I just went
Mm.
mind blown. And that little plant said to 14-year-old Doug, "You shouldn't be doing this shit on your own, stuff like that. We're going to scare the heck out of you." And I felt like I was going to be in a straitjacket in a mental asylum and in a padded room for the rest of my life and haven't touched it since because I, you know, I I did it for fun. I
Yeah.
wanted to I wanted the high. I wanted the
Well,
buzz.
and I think there's lies the problem with a lot of it. So I talk to a lot of people, and it is funny now because I will go somewhere and people ask, what do I do? Well, you know, when you're in psychedelics, people they want to know more, which is really kind of funny. So I was somewhere with some friends last Thursday. People are asking what I do. I'm like, I'm a psychedelic facilitator, and they're like, a psychedelic what? So you kind of get into that conversation, and that's I think where a lot of the miscommunication or maybe the misunderstandings are is that a lot of people have had experiences where they didn't go so well. But what we have found is that there's intention. You know, why are you going into medicine? So are you going into it, for a joyride, or are you going in for a specific purpose? Because again, your soul has stuff that they has to get out, that they want to get out. But you don't. You keep it all down. So what is it that you're trying to do? So even like when I went on my very first one, we were talking about like I sat with someone for 6 weeks and I started talking about all the things I thought I wanted, but when I went in, um, I ended up getting what my soul actually needed. So being able to do that, but then you have this process afterwards. So it's great if you go in with all this intentionality and you fly off to the moon or wherever, then you come back and you're like, what do I do with all this? Like, what do I do with all this knowledge? So that's where we have what we call integration, where we now talk about that. Like, what were you getting from that experience? What I typically do, and a lot of people who are they do it differently, is I have you record your own sessions. I'm not in the room. I will come by and I will check to make sure that you're okay. um, I have you record it, but then I have you create a transcript around it. So when you're listening to yourself in medicine and you're getting everything out that your every moan, everything that your soul wants to say is going to come out. Then you just type it verbatim, word for word, every O, I mean, everything. And then we spend the next several months just going through each of those lines of what did it really mean? Like, what were you saying? And then we create note cards. So for me, my very first one, my wife was a big part of. I had a card that was a Rachel card. My son Jonathan, I had a Jonathan card, where there were certain things that I had still not let go of, that were holding me from the relationship that we have today. I saw things in our house. Again, we're building this brand new home. I saw my wife dancing. We had a big party and people were around us and it was an anniversary or it was something, but there was so much love in the house. The house actually became a home. And I said that in my experience. It was a house that became a home. So I had a card. And I do the same thing for, the people that I work with. So it is much more strategic, when you do it. And now what I do with businessmen is that we actually create these crazy impossible goals. Like, what is your goal for the year? Not in money, in purpose. So, and we define those by your body. Like, what is the goal for my body this year? Do I want to work out? I work out every day. Live a very super healthy lifestyle. What's my body goals? What's my relationship with God or the creator or with whatever you want to call it? What's the impossible goal for your relationship with your family and your sons? And then we talk about business because business has to fund those other things, but those other things are what fund business. So they're all interconnected. So when we do this, we create these goals, and then every quarter we actually go into medicine, the guys I work with, and free of ego, are they on track or off track, or are those goals not even aligned with their soul? So it gets you to think kind of differently about how it is. So it is definitely not a joyride, but it's very strategic because now your soul doesn't lie. When it's free of ego, you know exactly where you are and where you're supposed to be.
Yeah, yeah, really interesting that whole thing around with the doing that and the psychedelics and the truth that it tells. And so you're saying that every quarter you and your work colleagues do that, and are you using the psychedelics to see if you're on track?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. It's the check-in mechanism because
Yep. So that's the
it doesn't.
intention. So the intention is checking in. Am I on track, off track with where I'm trying to get to with my possible goals? So
Yeah.
are my goals not even aligned with where my soul needs to be? There,
Nice.
there comes a point we kind of talked about this last week. There comes a point where you don't need medicine. So I personally don't need it anymore. I don't really use it anymore. Um, because I'm leading other people in facilitation, I don't. But you eventually become the medicine. So when we talk about intuition, you eventually become that. So you become aligned with what your intentions and what your intuition are. So I can go into a really good deep meditation, and like we said before, I create a 5 year outlook of where my company is going to be. Just I can see it, I can feel it. I know that my head and my heart are aligned with that. But there comes a point where I don't think you need it. But I think getting to that point for everybody is a little different. So then I
Yeah.
think it does become, I've seen it as a crutch. I've seen some people, think that the only way to connect to the God, the universe, whatever, is to be in medicine. And that is not the case. So for listeners, I am not advocating that people do medicine for the rest of their lives. But there is a benefit. One of the things with Steve Jobs with Apple, he loved LSD. That's where he got a lot of his creativity.
Mm.
So,
Yeah. And even though you're creating a supplement for brain and
yeah.
neuroplasticity, you're just telling people, yeah, I'm going to create this great product that you might need a couple of times, but that's it. Then you won't need
I
it.
mean, in theory, you're going to need it because your brain creates new neural pathways. Anytime you do breath work, anytime you do
Right.
meditation, anytime that you,
Ah,
so yeah. So what we're really talking about is neuroplasticity doesn't just happen in psychedelics. It happens every time that you do work. And
right.
and that's what we're really trying to support is that neuroplasticity.
Okay, right. So this could be a daily supplement for,
Yeah,
because yeah, I do breath work probably at least 5 mornings a week. Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
doing the, yeah, yeah,
And I
excellent.
love breath work.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's where a lot, again, kind of go back to you become the medicine. And I think breath work is an incredible alternative to that. But you have to learn how to navigate your mind to be able to do that.
Mm.
And when you're creating these new neural pathways, I always equate it to if anybody has ever skied, I kind of equate it to your brain has these ruts. You're going down the same ski slope every day, from the time you're zero to the time of, in our case, you're older. So you're living in the same thought process every day. And when you have these incredible transformational experiences, you create new ski slopes. You create a whole new path on the mountain. You have a brand new fresh coat of snow. This supports that. So there is nothing else like it on the market. Again, it wasn't just for the hangover effect. It's to be able to grow those neurotransmitters, be able to continue to have that new fallen snow on the ski slope. So that was really the main purpose of it. It just kind of happened as I saw the need with people with that hangover effect. But the ingredients that are in there are actually going to continue to facilitate neuroplasticity.
Okay. And so this is just about released on the market or?
Yeah, 10 weeks. So yeah, we start production next week, and
Yep.
they'll be ready in 10 weeks.
Which, and so what date is that roughly
So mid-August
of 2024?
of 2024.
Okay. And it will be called,
Numa Hydration.
okay. And I've looked at the website and that link that'll be in the show notes and
Correct.
stuff like that. People will find all that. And I'm sure you'll market it and tell people about
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah.
it.
So, again, it's this kind of funny when you live in purpose. Like I'm speaking at conferences from August until December. I just on my journey, talking about walking in the garden, and then what's emerging between genetics and hydration with psychedelics. I mean, we have just scratched the surface of where the science is taking us.
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And something in your book that I was reading and it helped me realize what was so wrong with my 14-year-old self attempting what I did on my own. It's kind of like I decided to go on a hike into a very dangerous mountain range to have to see something so friggin' amazing that you wouldn't ever meet anyone who'd ever seen what you'd just seen. And it was just going to be fun. And so I just ran up that mountain and I fell off, the first ledge just fell, the rocks fell out from under me and I fell 500 feet and splattered on the ground. Whereas had I had a guide,
Yeah.
say to me, Doug, I've done this before. It's very dangerous, but if you really want to do it, we'll do it safely. This is what we have to plan. This is what we have to do.
Yeah.
And I need you to practice on these slopes here. And I need to know that you're competent to do this. And I'm going to show you where to stand, how to do what. And we're actually going to have a safety belt. And
Oh,
occasionally we're going to clip on. And
this is exactly, yes,
yeah,
exactly.
and the facilitators go because they've done the high. And I'm a scuba instructor, and I've taken people through it. And it's like me when imagine I was 14 and I went and rented some scuba gear, or I pinched some scuba gear from around the back of a scuba shop, and I ran down to the ocean and put it on and dived in, like into the under the way and went down. And I put my weight belt was 4 times too heavy for me and everything, and down I went and I drowned. Like that was basically what happened to me. Instead of being a 14-year-old saying, "Excuse me, mister, I'd like to scuba dive." And I go, "Well, Sonny, it's going to cost you like $800. Go and see your dad. Oh, yeah, here's the $800. I've been saving my lunch money. Oh, okay, come over here." And over
Let's go learn.
the next few weeks, he teaches me in the swimming pool. And eventually, but am I going to get to go in the ocean? Yeah, in a couple of weeks, we'll get in the ocean. We're practicing in the swimming pool, do it all. And I get in and I have an amazing experience. And I see eagle rays and, turtles and have a wonderful time. But yeah, but
It's
occasionally someone doesn't have a
ex
great time, but,
it's
yeah,
exactly, and and there always will be challenging. Again, I hear the word bad trip. I don't believe there's a bad trip. I believe that there are uncomfortable situations that you'll be put into that your soul needs release from. But again, learning the techniques, learning to be able to learn in the pool, are the essential things that you are going to get you through it. I mean, I've had situations where people have had some really uncomfortable things, but you have to be able to accept whatever's coming in, and you have to be able to look at it as a lesson. What is it that you needed to learn from that, rather than just jumping off or falling off the cliff?
yeah, yeah. So, yeah. And I guess even at my age now, at 60, I had that bad experience falling off the cliff. I've never been I'm so, occasionally my mother always called me a daredevil, and I've done some really crazy stuff. And but that one scared the shit out of me. I've never been game to try and
And
climb that mountain again.
and I'm the exact opposite. Like I've never had an experience with drugs ever, like ever, because they were wrong. Growing up in a Christian home, they were wrong. Growing up in the 80s, wrong. Being in the military, wrong. Like I've never took a drug ever.
Mate,
So
yeah, I went to church from when I was 0 till I was 13. And like and Friday nights, mum dragged me along, bang. And then when, I did all that. And then when I was 20 till I was, for a long, long time, decades after that, full on into church. So I've been to church, but I'll still do crazy shit like that too. Like
yeah,
I'll mix it in. Yeah.
never had any idea that I would be sitting here talking about this. But the ripples, again, going back to the ripples of the impact that it has on connecting people back to spirituality, connecting people back to God, through plant medicine is just, again, like I'm sitting here and I still laugh. Like I get to do this like every day.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Oh, I've got friends now that do plant medicine, all sorts of things and stuff like that. And yeah, and I tell them my little story and they just giggle and they go, "It'll be fine, Doug. If you do it again, it'll all be fine." I'm like,
I'll be fine.
I'm going, don't get plant. We know someone, no, 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 not even talking about it. Like, but talking to you, it's taken me my anxiety of it down a notch or two, and reading your book. It's like, oh, okay, this is, yeah. And just the analogy that I presumably intuitive came up with just a few minutes ago of climbing the mountain and the
It was exactly spot on.
yeah and then stealing some scuba gear and jumping like at the back. I mean, I've never thought of those two things in my life before, and it's just like I just came up with two intuitive. And man, this is why we're talking about intuition is such a superpower. I just now understand so much fully that if I went on a plant medicine journey now, there's potential it would be not enjoyable. It would be wild, but it would be so much less chance because so many people have gone before me. Tens of thousands, millions of people have scuba dived before I ever learned to scuba dive. And
Yeah.
all of that combined knowledge is put there. And so my scuba instructor had the knowledge and the empathy and the experience of what was going to happen next. And he's like, Doug, I'm going to ask you to do this now. When it happens, you'll feel like this. It's okay. Watch me do it. Because I felt like that. I'm going to do this. I'm going to fill my mask with water right now. And then I'm going to exhale through my nose and blow the water out of my mask. Watch me do it. Boom.
Oh,
I'm like, shit, I don't like that. Like, he goes, you won't like it, but you've got to do it. And yeah, it was like,
I remember I was working with someone and I created a playlist because music is frequency. Frequency moves you from place to place in an experience. It's unbelievably healing. So I again create the playlist for my clients. So I'm sitting with one and I'm not in the room. Like I will go in and check just to make sure that you're okay, but I also know based on time where certain things are going to be in the music. So is some dark scenes that kind of take you into more of an emotional. So I peek my head into a room and I can see the uncomfortableness that's going on, and you kind of like hold your breath. You're not breathing as much. So I walk over and I open up the headphones and I'm like, are you okay? And there was some. He's like, it's uncomfortable, and I said, it's okay. Darkness is where infinite possibilities reside. And I put the headphone back on and just it was like watching them go. Because when you were able to reframe darkness, because we just have this natural thought process around dark, that it's naturally evil. But you can't have creation without darkness. You can't have polarity without light and dark. So when you give someone permission to be able to accept the darkness, because oftentimes we need that for healing. We need to be able to face that darkness. And when it was done, it was so funny. He screamed, he's like, are you still here? And it's like, where am I going? Like, I'm here to supervise. And he's like, that was exactly what I needed. Like, it was exactly what I needed. And I just kind of laughed. I'm like, okay, that's polarity. Like that we all have this duality inside. And it's just being able to tap into that intuition to be able to know, what it is.
yeah, it reminds me, several years ago, my son, long story cut short, he bought a light called a Lucia light that was invented back in 2010 in Austria. Very, very expensive light with a computer program connected to it with like dozens of little LED lights and stuff. Basically, you lay under it. You have it maybe 2 or 3 feet above your face, and you lay there with your eyes closed, and it only flashes white light. But people who've had ayahuasca experiences say it's very, very similar. Um, and you put headphones on and you listen to music. So when he first bought it, he was fitting out a shop to make it really nice environment and everything, da da da. Well, while he was fitting the shop out, we had the light at our house. So I had about 50 or 60 sessions under it for 30, 40 minutes at a time in the months before he needed to take it to the shop. Mate, I was like the professional guinea pig, like self-appointed guinea pig on what music was going to. And, we tried all the Led Zeppelin, the heavy metal, didn't cut it at all. And so we found all these, I think I can't even pronounce it, sigophical or something like tones and things like that, that
Yeah.
are very attributed to it. And so then I tried it I'd have a beer before I'd have a session. Definitely took away from it. It dropped the frequency of things off. It was because basically what you're seeing when you're having the great experience, it's like a kaleidoscope of lights of different colors, and it's radically different colors. And if you and I laid under it together, like, head to head sort of, and it came down over us, and we both had the same music on, we would both have radically different experiences. And based on what's going on inside our heads, but the music really did make a big difference.
Yeah.
Yeah, a big, big difference. And yeah, it's almost like the kaleidoscope as it changes constantly. It's like a veil, and occasionally well, for me, I could start to see through it, and it would thin depending on what was going on, what state I was on, and sometimes the veil would thin quite a bit. And I did have a substance one time with it, a very tiny bit, and it enhanced it a bit. And I thought, oh, this is good. So I had a bit more of that substance the next time, and I got my handy little podcast microphone and put it right beside me. I thought, I'm going to narrate this. My tongue nearly died from trying to keep up with what was going on. I literally felt like I lived 10,000 lifetimes in 40 minutes. It was insane. I just had to just turn the microphone off for a while and rest my mouth. It was going, I mean, the scene was changing so radically. It was like I would be at the beach, in my bed, sitting in my lounge room, at work, on the surface of the moon, inside the planet, inside a planet somewhere else in another solar system, all in a millisecond. I was just everywhere. It was very enjoyable. It really was. There was nothing scary. There was nothing out there, but it was exhausting. And
Yeah.
especially trying to narrate what I was.
Keep
And
up.
so on that one, the veil completely thinned. It went so thin and see through. It was I could see the other side, but there was so much on the other side. It was just like, okay, I took too much of that substance because the frequency was way beyond what I could cope with. If I, there's nothing wrong with that frequency, but I picked up every radio signal there
Yeah.
was everywhere. And I wasn't overwhelmed, but it was just too much. There was millions of voices talking to me at once, almost, you
So
know.
so I have a friend who's also a facilitator, and she was taking. So there's one I talk about that I haven't taken that I can't wait to take. It's a toad. So it's 5-MeO DMT.
Mhm.
It's a Sonoan frog, a Sonoan toad, excuse me. And I was talking to her, and she's like, "Oh my gosh!" She's like, "I took like one small like drop, and it was 15 minutes." She's like, I died." Like she's like, "I felt like I died." She's like, "The entire world black holed, and then it was all reborn." She's like, "The entire experience felt like it was very similar, like hours. It was only 15 minutes." So, and she was like, "It took every one of the practices that I talk about in my book, to just keep her wits about her." She's like, "It was the most incredibly amazing." But I look at everything now, almost like you're in the Matrix, like, and you can just see everything as ones and zeros, and again, none of this that what we see is real in the way that we see it. It's just how our brain interprets it. This is
Yeah.
kind of an interesting. That's really cool
Yeah.
experience.
Actually, your supplement sounds like it'd be a great thing before and after a light
Yeah.
session. Yeah, yeah,
So yeah, that's kind of
yeah,
cool.
yeah, yeah. Because they've got a professional studio. They've set up beautiful big arched mirror at the end of the wall that's probably about 8 feet wide and about 9 or 10 feet high, sort of with all it's set about 4 inches off the wall with a LED purple LED light around
Wow.
it, and then the other three walls have all got these really sheer beautiful curtains, and it's just they've set it up really well. And the
Sounds
ceiling's
really
painted
amazing.
black, and you go in and it's just a vibe, and you're like, people go and go, oh wow, it's in the right
Yeah.
environment. Because when he was looking at buying one, he thought, oh, he would test it out. So he looked up online anyone in within 100-mile range of who had one, which were very few and far between, and he would go to the and have an experience with one, and people had them set up in their garage or their spare bedroom,
Uh,
and it was just like it was weird, like you walk in and yeah, so now it's like he's in a shopping mall, he's got a real, so people, he's got a real address, and people
that's
go and
amazing.
park and off they go and in they go and do the thing, and then they've ventured now too, they've got a sound bed as well. So in a separate room, you can lay on the bed and
Oh,
and the whole thing. So
sound beds
this,
are amazing.
yeah, yeah. So he made his own, and so for my sixth, because he did a lot of research on how to make it. So then for my 60th birthday, I said, "Oh, I want one too." But we've got in our bedroom, we've got a window seat where that lifts up, and it's probably 7 feet long and about 2 foot wide. So we've put the what are they? They're not speakers. They're whatever you call them in under there. We've screwed them in
Yeah, they
under
almost
that.
look like this, but yeah, the
Yeah,
cones. Yeah.
yeah, and the amplifier and everything. It's sort of all there. So then, and it's got a 50 millimeter, like 2 inch memory foam mattress on it already. So we've got that set up.
Wow.
Yeah, and so just punch that in, and then for my wife's 60th birthday, the kids bought her a PEMF mat, which EMF is electromagnetic frequency, and
Yeah.
the P, I think from memory, the P stands for pulse. I'm not sure on that. And so it's made up of like tens of thousands of crushed crystals, like pieces, like tiny, minute. Like obviously, when they get crystals and they grind them and shape them, there's all the
Yeah.
little tiny bits that fall off. So someone's gathered gazillion of these up, and
Wow.
the mat's about probably 3/8 or a little bit, certainly not half an inch thick, or maybe half an inch at the most thick, sort of all sewn with all these crystals in it. And then there's magnets up the middle of it and all these red lights for red light therapy in it. So we lay that on top of the sound bed. And so we've got magnets going up and down the spine, the red light
Oh
and
my
the
goodness, that's so
crystal stuff.
cool.
And then the vibration of the thing with the headphones on. Listen, it's pretty cool scene.
That
So
really is. So I use this there's an app called Nucalm, Nucalm. A
mhm.
friend of mine turned me on to it, and there's these discs that you put on your vagus nerve. So you think about so it's three fingers, yeah, three fingers from your left wrist. You put this disc, and it sends a frequency from your vein up to your heart to your neck, vagus nerve into your brain. It was actually created by a dentist who couldn't use anesthesiology for some patients. So he uses frequency to put them into a meditative state immediately. So 30 minutes of this app is the same as 2 hours of sleep. And that's what I use for meditations because it takes you into the same frequency brain waves. And I come out, I'm like, wow, like that was like it's like the most incredible thing to be able to
So you
use.
use the
But
app, but you've bought the device and put it on.
I bought the discs, yeah. So they're just
Nice.
disposable discs. Just peel them off, put it back on.
Right.
So yeah,
Beautiful.
they're amazing. So it's kind of like a little sound bed. Sound beds
Yeah.
are amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. All right, what do we got
I
here?
built I built a meditation room in my house. So yeah, so it's kind of away from everything. It's dark, completely soundproof. So yeah, it's kind of amazing.
Yeah. Right. Something else I read that sort of fits in with what you're talking about there. You talk about personalized genetic testing.
Yeah.
Um, you want to talk about that for a minute about
Sure.
how the,
So, again, starting this whole process of psychedelics, and we kind of talked about, this MAP study that was done showing that 71% of people, first time have no further symptoms. So the curious mind that I have, I immediately gravitate to, well, why not the 29%? Like, why didn't they have a great experience? And then I also started to notice that, like, when I was leading people, some people I could give one mushroom, like what you had when you were 14. Some I would have to give enough to choke a small farm animal. And I started to wonder about that. So the lab I was working with, that I am working with down in DC, they do a lot with PTSD and the Warfighter Health Initiative for Air Force, for the Canadian Air Force. And they've been able to identify PTSD genes. Because again, the theory in genetics is that if you have trauma long enough, there's what's called epigenetics, where your DNA can actually change just based on trauma. So as I'm kind of thinking about that, I'm thinking about this research, I'm thinking about PTSD, I get into this conversation about serotonin receptors. So everyone has serotonin receptors and inhibitors. And I started probing, and then I found that there are 7 genes that we use that can, in theory, regulate psychedelic therapy. So, because again, each of these different substances target different parts of the brain, um, that's all goes back to coding. So, with genetics. So, we started this process and we are creating a data set. So, we're looking at connecting all of the scientific papers with all of the psychological and clinical health related information. So, when you go in, if you're going to a responsible facilitation place, we want to know your psychological history, but we also want to know your physical history. So if I can capture all that data and I can put it into a gigantic data set, now as a clinician, I can, let's just say, Doug, you want to have therapy, I can swab you, I can send it off to a lab, I can run all of this data, I can run all of that stuff, but then I'm now looking at your genes and I'm saying, based on your genetic code, we think ayahuasca would be better for you, or ketamine inhaler is not going to be great because you have this particular gene that is going to mean that you metabolize something else differently. So in a very, very broad way. So the science says, according to that, that can tell you which one's actually going to be better of all of the psychedelics. Now, where it's going to be really fun is that eventually we're going to have to get into trials where now dosing requirements. Can I eventually get into that? So where I now have a population health study, I have cohorts where we're now looking at this stuff and saying, based on your genetic code, we need to give you X amount of dosing, as opposed to the other person going back to some of the people I've needed to give enough to choke a small farm animal. Why? Like, why do they need more? Is it a serotonin inhibitor or is it other things? So we're in a very early stage of it right now, and unfortunately, science isn't as caught up with the scientific data as what the genetic test is. But hopefully, over the next couple of years, we'll all be married together. But that's the direction we're heading with a gene test.
Right. And just from your, I'll say short time that you've been in this field, because you were in
Yeah,
medical insurance and
healthcare,
stuff
yeah, health
before. Yeah,
insurance, yeah.
yeah, yeah. Um, how have you found the industry? Do they share information nicely, or do the people tend to keep it close to their chest when they find something new out?
Well, the great thing about the industry right now is because there's so much clinical work going on, everyone's sharing data. Like
Great.
everyone is completely open right now because we're all trying to advance the same thing,
Yeah.
healing. So it's really about transformation. I mean, everyone really is kind of opening up their science. We're going back and redusting off old clinical trials, and there's so much going on right now where there's just this incredible amount of sharing of data with everybody. And I think again, because there's 130 different clinical trials going on with these different psychedelics, different things that we're testing. I mean, there's a lot of data happening right now.
Good. Yeah, that sounds good because like I've always sort of felt that we don't share information around the world that well, or but we get so jealous of it. And I know I study an ancient form of Chinese medicine where apparently many, 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 many thousands of years ago, people in China didn't move towns a whole lot, like they were just stable. And over hundreds, if not 1,000 years, the Chinese scientists studied people and then passed information on. Like one of the things that they do is read people's faces and develop their personality traits
Hmm.
simply through observation. It's like, okay, we've now got 7 children with this shaped nose. We've got 4 children with this part of their ear like that. We got da da da, and we're going to follow them through their lives. And they just keep doing it, and they document everything, and they pass that on to the people who are now given that job. And over many hundreds or thousands of years, they find these facial features tend to have this type of personality trait, and it's just because they shared the information and there was
Yeah.
no holding back, and it benefits to people to make people realize what's going on. So yeah, no, I'm glad to hear that in this time of great need that this information's because the information's not ours. It's obviously coming from elsewhere,
Right.
because what you've been given in the last year or two, it's come from elsewhere. It's come from somewhere, and it's just not for you. It's will benefit you definitely,
Yeah.
but it's for you. It's part of why you're here, to help benefit, so that what you just learned can ripple out.
So I think that again we're at a really interesting time because we're at a crossroad of science and enlightenment, and that's my new podcast that's coming. We call it Numa, the crossroad of science and enlightenment, because that is exactly what's happening right now. So we have all this. I was talking to somebody who was like, it's like the fifth great awakening, like worldwide, like we're all like searching for something, but now we have a science component, and one thing with science is it has to be replicatable. We have to be able to not only say here's what it's going to do, but we have to be able to replicate that. We have to be able to show clinically speaking that it has those benefits. So it really is kind of it's a crazy time because you're mixing clinical and ceremonial and spiritual, and you're kind of doing it all together. And then you get into the conversation of, if I just go into a clinic and I get an IV or a psychedelic therapy and I don't have any talk afterwards, again, going back to the ledge, um, what's the benefit? And how do you track that in a clinical trial? Like, how do you really say that, Doug's psychedelic experience based on his trauma was better or worse than mine based on what my trauma was? You're both getting to the same mountain. There's just different paths to get there. But how do you account for that? It's never been done. So it really is kind of it's been fun to watch sitting on the sidelines of these clinical trials. And again, it was 2 weeks ago, the FDA in the US was looking at this clinical trial for MDMA, and no, I don't think anyone's arguing the effect of what it can do. I mean, 71% of people no longer have trauma. Can't argue with that number, but then you get into was it the medicine? Was it the medicine and talk therapy? Was it the integration part? So there's a lot of moving pieces in this right now.
Yeah. And for me, another good reason for us men to tap into our intuition, and realize, and which is just, for me, it's just another frequency. It's just something from out there. And when you put that little thing on your left wrist, 3 fingers down
Mm,
from your hand, and it taps through, sends you into a deep meditative state, changes the brain waves, that sort of thing. It's like the radio on your cars just got,
yeah,
the antenna just went up, you know, 10 times higher than it was, and you tapped into different realms, and you're
yeah.
hearing different stuff, sensing different things. And it's like, you're gonna, when you come out of that, you share what happened, or you put into place what you heard to benefit yourself and others. Yeah.
But I think the biggest thing that we have to do is to put yourself there, because we're so focused on doing. Like, we're so focused on having that nobody really wants to take the time to slow down enough to be able to engage in that frequency. I mean, everything around us is a frequency, but you have
Yeah.
to be willing to slow down enough to be able to hear it.
Yeah. Yeah. I've just been going back to that intuitive thing I got before with my mushroom experience. Was like, I mean, it was really friggin' bad, mate. It was the worst. Back, honestly, I'm 60 years old. It's the worst experience of my life. And now, what you're just saying there, it was like me sneaking in the back door of the local scuba shop, pinching some of their gear with the intent of bringing it back when they weren't watching, going into the ocean. Now, if I'd have had a really good experience, if it had worked, if I didn't
Yeah.
die, if I'd have gone down and actually seen some things that were enjoyable, I had no one to share them with, because I couldn't come back to the scuba shop, to the people who had a similar experience, and say, "Hey, I just borrowed your scuba gear from out the back." They would just like ring the plane. Whereas if I'd have gone in and said, "Hey, I've heard that what's under the ocean is really cool. Can you teach me?" Sure, like, bugger off, come back when you got $800. Yeah, whatever. I come back with
Yeah.
money. We sit. They talk to me for a lot. like there's community, like we're now, and they're sharing all of their learned experiences, and then they take me down and they make it the best experience for me, and we go down, and then eventually, after months or years or whatever, I say to them, like, I want to learn to do what you do. And I
Yeah.
start teaching them. And I'm reading in magazines that there's other places to go too. Like, so I start traveling around the world, and I
Yeah.
go to all these exotic dogs, and I have all these conversations, and I share. Well, but my stupid experience of pinching the gear out and going in and having the worst experience ever, like, or almost dying, never touching scuba again.
Yeah.
Like, it's just, I've done over 2,000 scuba dives in reality, and like, it's just
Wow.
so awesome. But
And you're so right, because when you learn to be able to scuba dive and to be able to get certified to teach other people, I mean, I've seen amazing things. Like I've seen men walk out of rooms crying, knowing that their marriage, it went left when it should have gone right because of one instance 5 years before, and they didn't even see it, but they saw it in medicine and come out and to be able to heal that relationship. Or I've had other ones who have had conversations with grandfathers, generational stuff that were no longer here, that they were able to understand why the family was doing some of the things that the family was, and generational things being lifted. I mean, so it's been truly an amazing journey.
yeah, yeah. The message is, it for me, it's like intuition. It's there. It's got your back. It's there to help you. These
Mm.
things there are they're amplified experiences.
Yeah.
It's going to be for a short amount of time. We're going to bring a lot of stuff together here, and we're going to do a
Yep.
lot of, it's going to highlight. It's going to bring the froth to the top or whatever. It's like it's got all
Yeah.
those things that we put, like I talked right near the beginning. We put in the garden. We put all this stuff on top of it, and we think it's going to compost and break down. It's not. You go on that, and all of a sudden, whatever that was, it's comes out just as strong as when it went in, or a lot stronger, and it's out and in your face. And
Exactly.
yeah, it didn't break down, and yeah, at all. Yeah, wow.
Well, and again, I think the beautiful thing about that is that you learn to trust your intuition, because when you learn to slow down, you learn to meditate, you learn to journal. Again, I love to journal, because you're able to get all of that stuff, whatever your thoughts are, the connection of your head and your heart. And that's when I think intuition becomes the strongest, when your head and your heart are completely aligned, and now they're kind of going the same direction. You learn to be able to trust yourself. And not everyone, again, has to do medicine, but I think it is the willingness to be able to connect your head to your heart, and to be able to be vulnerable and to share all your secrets. I mean, again, kind of going full circle, the strongest person in the room is who? I mean, the one with no secrets. So, because
Yeah,
then you are completely free, you are completely aligned.
yeah, yeah. Wow. Well, I think for the last 2 hours, we've had a pretty powerful conversations. Like many,
We have.
yeah, we have. Um, Before we finish up, is there anything we haven't talked about that you want to talk about?
No, this was great. I really appreciate it.
And if I went back to my notes, there's probably all sorts of things there, but then there'd be another 2 hours. Um,
Easily. I know the conversation we had last week. I mean, we were everywhere. No, I think everything that we wanted to say and everything that needed to be said was said.
yeah,
It was especially touching for me, when we were talking. There was a moment there when I saw there were some tears coming down your eyes, and that was beautiful for me. For you to be able to feel comfortable, to be able to do that. So I see and I acknowledge that. I just thought it was really cool, and I'm honored that you were able to do that with me.
yeah, yeah. Oh, mate, it's big. It started in 2017. I flew to California for 5 days and did an energy clearing class, and the facilitator warned us that our lives would change, and da 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 da. And I'm like, and it did. Like I broke down in tears on the second day there, just randomly at the at the dinner table. I didn't know what was going on because I was a steak on the plate guy, and then finish that, get on the plane at 11 p.m. at LAX. It's a fly to Brisbane, 14-hour flight. So I'm like, bang, start watching movies. And it's dark. You've got my headphones on. I've got my own little screen. And I'm starting to cry. And I'm like, my wife cries in movies. I don't cry. I'm not sobbing, but there's tears running down my face. Wow. Next movie, tears running down my face. Third movie, tears running down my face. And I'm like, holy shit, what's going on here? Like, because I used to, excuse me, I used to always look over at my wife, hit the sloppy bit in the movie, and she'd be crying. I would sort of kid her because she was crying. Now I don't look over at her because tears are rolling down my face. It just happens now. It's just
Connected. You're connected. I like that.
Yeah, the tear tap turned on, and I just let them flow now. I don't care where they come, what happens. It's not all the time, but yeah.
But again, I think it gives people permission to be authentic.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, absolutely. All right.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. So I'll have your contact info in the show notes if anyone's interested in your brain neuroplasticity substances and things like that. The link will be there. And yeah, if they want to follow you, you're on Instagram, Facebook,
Yeah, Instagram,
LinkedIn.
Facebook. Yeah, my book's on Amazon. So
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, and
Walking in the Garden.
Yep, I'm halfway through that one, and yeah, we'll have links for all those there. Excellent.
Perfect.
Thank you, Alan.
My pleasure, Doug. It was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, we're at the end of another thought-provoking episode. Remember to subscribe so you'll be alerted to new episodes. I want to say thank you to the men who are joining me on this journey of intuitive development. I truly hope our time together has expanded your reality and reinforced trust in your ever-reliable gut feeling. Embrace your intuition. It will not lead you astray. Until next time, stay tuned, stay curious, and trust your gut.